Hi guys, welcome to the latest episode of Silicon Spice, where tech leaders share life's unique flavors. And today we have Yue here. You want to wave hi? Currently, Yue is the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Fuzzy, which is a Series C company about future of pet healthcare. And you're also an executive coach.
That's right.
And you wrote a book with brilliance, really inspiring and practical, called The Uncommon Executive. So really, I asked the first question, like, what is your path and how did you get started into product management?
Yeah, great question. I started as a founder, actually. I founded a wine e-commerce startup with a co-founder. We went through an accelerator program, and she came from more of the venture side. So she was like the CEO, she did all the sales.
Yeah.
And so I naturally fell more into product and operations and just fell in love with the product role of figuring out what people need, building an actual product for them. In the case of the startup, it was both software and physical wine delivery.
Oh,
So there was a nice operations component and a wine component. And from there, I was lucky enough to join Thumbtack as the first PM. And I think I really sort of found my footing or grounding as a product manager there.
Yeah, that's really cool. I saw your LinkedIn when you were at Harvard Business School. You were the co-president of the wine club and stuff. So that is one of your passions.
It is. I did a certification. So it's definitely a passion of mine.
Yeah. I love that kind of you found your path into PM by being a founder first. So you already have the skills to understand, what are the top pain points we should address? And then you already kind of have the ability to communicate really well to cross-functional partners. That is a really interesting path. I started like many other folks. I started as a software engineer and then found my way into PM.
Yeah.
But I think, founder definitely would make good PM and vice versa, I think.
Well, I mean, I didn't mention this yet, but before that, I was at McKinsey. I definitely came at it from a more business perspective rather than an engineering perspective. I did do my undergrad in engineering, though I never worked in it. But I can definitely see how, if this is a Venn diagram, you're filling out the other half of the Venn diagram. Because for me, I filled out more of the technical engineering side, right? Versus if you come from the technical side, then you fill out more of the business side.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's a good transition to my second question, is you're on a C-level, right? So then how did you make that transition from a product leader, let's say a director of product or middle management? You may take the leap to the C-level. And then was it always your goal? Kind of, when you, let's say before you went to business school, you're like, okay, one day I want to be the C-level, I want to be that. Was this always something that on top of your mind the whole time?
It's a great question. I wouldn't say it was like a childhood dream,
Yeah.
But as I got into the working world, I enjoyed making decisions and I enjoyed a bit of freedom and autonomy.
Yeah.
And I felt more of it as you went up the leadership ladder, if you will. So I would say that I've always wanted to run product.
Okay.
Whether it's as a VP or a C-suite. But that was kind of what drove the motivation, was to be able to see sort of the full picture, if you will, right? And be able to not just, lead the people, but sort of define the culture and the organization, as well as build the product. But, there's always things that come with those roles that you're like, okay, I didn't sign up for that, but great, good to know. I'm going to learn how to do those things.
Okay.
So, I would say that it's a big transition in terms of mentality more than anything. I think when you are a doer and an executor, what you focus on, what you're praised for and recognized for and rewarded for is different from what people look for in a leader.
Yeah, that is true.
And I think that's the biggest transition. It's almost regardless of title. It's going from the executor to the leader that I think is one of the biggest leaps in the career ladder.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were very product-centric, right? You want to solve a problem, and then you want to reach a bigger impact. So that kind of takes you to the next level, that help you to think strategically. Which reminds me, I know one of the chapters in the book you talk about, when you first became executive, your mindset has to shift, right? It's not about, your team, it's about the whole company, like where this is going. So even though some people might, I know one of the example you mentioned, that one of the leader, that even though her team size shrunk, and then by reducing costs, she actually made a bigger impact for the whole company. So that was very interesting. Like that mindset shift, I think that's very different. Even though let's say I'm an IC right now, right? But one day, if I want to become a manager, I think that's like one level of mindset shift. And then the next level, when you go to the executive, that's another mindset shift. Yeah, I find that very interesting.
It's an idea of like, are you playing in a mindset of scarcity where there's a limited pie and you're trying to divide the pie, so if you get more, then I'll get less, right? Zero-sum game. Or are you thinking, okay, how do we grow this pie together? How do we grow this company together? Because maybe in the short term, I'll have a little bit less, but that means in the long term, actually, we both have more. So it's not unselfish, right? I'm not saying like, here's, here you go, but it's kind of, you're playing a much longer term game and you're playing with everyone in mind rather than, okay, what's in it for me or my team or, even my function sometimes.
No, that makes sense. I think as a company leader, you're deciding the fate of the company, right? So that every decision you make is not just about like the people, the size of the people you're in charge of is one thing, but it's more about you have to make the company thrive. So then, as you said, make the bigger of the pie.
Especially in a product role. I think more so than ever, folks in product and engineering as well are driving the strategy. It is the business. It is the sort of driving function of the company. And so in that scenario, I think those types of decisions become a lot more important. It's also important in, let's say, people and legal and finance, but I think they tend to be more supporting functions. So it tends to be a different type of trade-off.
Yeah, that's true. And one of my favorite questions is what does a typical day look like for you as a chief product and technology officer?
Yeah.
And I saw on your LinkedIn, you started as a CPO, but then eventually your pie grew bigger. What is if you had a typical day or a typical week, how would you describe it?
It's a great question. And I'll put it in the context of the size of the company, which I think is important. So the team is about 120 people. The overall company is a little more than 200.
Okay.
And so we're not talking about a Fortune 100 large organization, which I think the day-to-day will look very different. We're also not talking about like a 10-person startup.
Yeah, that's true.
Also look very different. So it's a company that has a relatively stable business, is definitely still in the growth phase. And so I think that defines a lot of that, plus the team size shapes the day-to-day and what that looks like. So I would say that, on an average day, there is a few meetings that are sort of decision-making meetings, if you will. Whether it's deciding with the executive team on, a longer term strategy, or, hey, this is how our function need to collaborate, or it's with the team being like, hey, we have this product decision that needs to get made, or this architecture decision that we want to get made. So I would call them like, hey, let's make decisions and move forward. And then I think in between those are often what I call sort of information gathering meetings.
Okay, it's like,
it's some form of what's going on.
Yeah.
Whether it's people, product, strategy, external conversations, it's kind of like what's going on in the company and the team and what's going on in the outside world and how might that inform some of the decision-making meetings. And then I would say that, a few times a week, given it is a startup and, it's still growing, you're putting out fires. So there's some emergency that comes up. You're like, okay, everybody, let's, get in a room, talk about it, figure out what needs to happen. You're kind of staying on top of that as well. And then I would say that I always try to spend some amount of time thinking about, like, where do I want the organization and the culture and the people and the team to evolve? And where do I want the product strategy to evolve? I find those things to be very tied. Like, if you have a certain strategy, the way it happens is actually not through me, it's through the people and the organization and the company. And so, really thinking, researching, contemplating about, what is the strategy and what are the goals and, who are the people that we have? What are their skills? What is their time consists of? And how do we need to maybe change or shift that in order to go after the strategy?
Yeah. How many direct reports do you have?
How many direct reports? I have our head of design. I have 2 heads of engineering. And then the product team still reports directly to me. So we have 4 PMs at the moment. Hopefully soon to be 5. So, and then, that's it. And then research reports into design and content report into design, and then data reports into engineering.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is I'm curious, as an executive, do you also spend a lot of time in your one-on-one with direct reports or like the skip meetings? Because I think, as you said, coaching people, making sure they have the right skills to execute the strategy is also very important.
Yeah. So that's part of the reason why the PMs still report directly. So there is a world where you can say, hey, why don't you have a head of product as well, right? So head of product, head of engineering, head of design. I want to be close to the product. So I still have them as direct reports. So there's not a skip. Yeah. Versus with design and engineering, well, engineering, there's just too many people. It's not possible, right? But with design, I have a head of design because one, that's not my path. So it's not my technical expertise, right? And I feel that a head of design brings like a design operations perspective and also a design leadership perspective that is not my strength necessarily. Same with engineering. And so I would say that from a mentorship coaching perspective, I do spend more time coaching people who directly report to me, right? That said, I have pretty much an open door policy where it's like, hey, if you want to talk about something, I will make time. And so I don't know that I've really said no to even like a, college grad engineer who's like, hey, I want to grab 30 minutes to talk about something. I really do try to make time for those conversations because it's important to me. But again, I will always also defer to the manager. And say like, hey, great conversation. If it's okay, I will relay this conversation to also your manager, unless it's about the manager. So in that case, I might handle it differently. But usually it's like, hey, let me work with your manager. I hear you, let's work on this together. And then why don't we meet again in a quarter or something to see how it's going. So it's less frequent and shorter, but I always make time for that conversation. And the company is small enough that it's not so impossible to do.
I love that. I think that's a pretty good balanced leadership style. I know Jensen Huang, when I went to one of the conference, he was like on the fireside chat. He was on the extreme side, right? He had 50 different reports and he doesn't have one-on-one. I guess he wouldn't have time either. He was saying that he would torture his report into greatness, right? He doesn't fire people. So if somebody has a weakness, everybody should know, right? So then he would have like these kind of all these VP in one meetings, and then that's like mentorship, like coaching live. You could see how other people grow. So that was very interesting.
It is interesting. Yeah, I would say that I don't use my one-on-ones for work conversations, if you will. Like product strategy, engineering strategy, decisions. I actually much prefer to make those always in groups. Because it's very rare that as one function, especially product, you can make a decision. You always need the buy-in of the other functions. So I don't like to make any decisions in one-on-ones. I don't actually like to talk about what people traditionally think of as work. Instead, I like to talk about career. I like to talk about how they're doing. I like to talk about what are you working on. I like to see if they have feedback for me. It's all the soft things, if you will. Because I do think it's super important from a culture perspective, and maybe because I enjoy doing this, to grow, your team and the people, your career. My relationship with the people that work with me is longer than just this job. Right. I want it to extend beyond just fuzzy, right? And so I want to invest in them, and that's why I only hire people I like as a part of my team that I see potential in, and so I try to keep the one-on-ones much more about career growth, like leadership skills, and those types of conversations rather than, what are we building? When's this thing launching? Let's review designs, that type of conversation.
Because there are other forums, as you said, there are design review, product review.
Do weekly team check-ins, all the leads. Like, we make forums for those conversations.
That's a good point because, from your report's perspective, they want to get coaching, like how can they improve versus just be like a status meeting. That makes sense.
I don't want to do check-ins of like, hey, is this thing getting going?
That's true. Next question is an interesting one because when I was reading your book, 2/3 of the way, and then also when I look at your resume on LinkedIn, I think you are I don't want to say the word trophy kid, but a little bit. Like your path is what Asian parents are dream of for their kids. Because when you cover business school, you had a startup, you were a Thumbtack, Facebook, and now you're in a C-level in a Series C company. And then of course the path is not linear, right? It's not like success just goes this way. There's definitely turns and pivots. So next question is, what do you think contributed the most to your success? What are some factors? I mean, of course, hard work, right? Like intelligence, smartness, of course. But what do you think, just from your perspective, that it could be luck, or it could be you choose the right industry? Like, what are some factors you think that helped you succeed?
Definitely because my mom forced me to play piano for 8 years. Biggest contributing factor to my success. Actually, it did help my patience.
Yeah.
But no, I would say for me, everything comes back to the people. I do think that in Silicon Valley, in tech, in any little sort of microcosm you get into, you find that, for better or worse, I would say at different tiers and groups of people in a way. And so in a way, when you're in a group of folks that are all moving up very quickly in their careers, they pull you forward. And they make referrals that, you know, get you into roles that you maybe wouldn't have gotten into. And they're also doing things with their own careers that you look at, you're like, okay, yeah, that's a good idea, right? And maybe I should do that too, right? So it's a combination of like, what are the examples around you that you're seeing? Who are the people? And then are they also getting to a place where they can almost like pull you up or pull you along, however you want to think about it, in their own career journey. And so I think hard work is definitely a piece of it, but there's a lot of folks who work really hard. But the relationship building and the keeping an eye on who you know and their trajectory, I think can be really, really important, especially if you're in that like growth phase of your career. And I've also transitioned a lot of different careers, right? From consulting to startups to, you know, tech, but also different things within tech. I think I can probably point to one or two people who, you know, are the reasons I was able to make those transitions. And so, you know, and I would say that the luck element is definitely a piece of it too, which maybe we'll get to later in the conversation, but market dynamics, you know, how the economy is doing, like that definitely also plays a part, right? We always joke in product, you know, this is the trajectory of a company, we're just doing this, right? And I feel like in a way your career sometimes is shaped by that as well. It's very hard to fight against some of the external forces that are happening. And so, you know, if the economy is going like this, your career is more likely to go like this, right? And so I think there's what you can control in terms of the people. And then there's just, you know, what's the overall trajectory.
So I think from what I've heard, there are definitely the peer support, right? That's like one big factor. But you also, because you are a great product leader, so people want to help you in your career as well. And the second one is that you are riding the right wave, right? Like when you join Facebook or you join Thumbtack, these are both like high growth companies. So you are growing with the company, and then you have big impacts across the organization that also kind of put a really great highlight on your resume. So that will help you to land your next role because you already at these tier one companies. That makes sense.
I had a very, you know, for luckier worse, I had a very sort of almost simple example of this when I was working in consulting, because in consulting you get various projects that are 3 months long, right? And you actually do have to pitch yourself every 3 months or so for the next project. And so you realize that for the people who get really good projects, they keep getting better projects. And by better, I mean not just like the type of project they want, but with better partners who care more about work-life balance, who care more about coaching, who care more about like bringing you along. So you have this self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will, where it's like, if you're good, you keep getting better because actually your mentors get better. But if you're not as good and people are like, oh, but then you get the really hard project. And then you get the really like challenging thing with a difficult team with really long hours. And then it's actually harder for you to succeed. And so I do see that dynamic. And so that's why I think I often talk to the people that I work with about momentum and how can you rebuild momentum. And so, you know, often people will be like, well, should I change jobs? Should I change teams? Should I change something? What should I change? What should I do? What should I be looking for? I'm like, look for momentum. Look for a place where you can build momentum in terms of your reputation, how you're doing, but also who knows about it and their momentum. Because I think that trajectory is really important.
I love that. I think the momentum is shaped by both from the company strategy and also the culture, right? When the leaders are doing the right thing, then that will bring bigger momentum to the company versus drive the company to the ground. But company also had to solve like the right problem. So it would get that, you know, product market fit or whatever we call it. So then that will keep the momentum going and stuff.
I mean, I think you hear a lot in the news and, you know, in, I guess, popular culture about these great visionaries and leaders who are horrible managers. Let's just put it that way, right? Like, these esoteric visionaries. And I think they definitely exist, but I would actually say that there are more people who are great product or engineering leaders and great coaches and mentors. They tend to actually go hand in hand more than people think.
Okay.
And so I actually think it's more rare to have like Steve Jobs, even Jensen in some sense of like, hey, I'm really good at this, but I don't want to do the leadership and the coaching.
I see. Yeah.
I would say most of the managers I've had at Thumbtack, at Instagram, at Meta, like they're both. They're great leaders, like product leaders and strategists, but they're also great coaches and mentors and just, people in general that you like.
Yeah. No, that's reassuring. I think kind of like the bell curve, right? The very top, like the multi-generation visionary, these people are very rare. Right. And then normal people don't get to work with them. So they don't, very fortunate or unfortunate, I guess.
Yeah.
There's the majority of people, as you said, kind of the middle of the bell curve that they have good product sense. They're also a good career coach for people. That's good to hear.
Because they know what it's like. They've also
been there,
come up through that and have seen what it's like to work with the, different teams.
Yeah, love that. Thank you. All right. I think now we get into the fun part of the interview. Hopefully it's more fun.
Save the fun for the end.
Yes. Since I work at Stitch Fit, so we're an e-commerce fashion company, I actually got this cardigan from Stitch Fit. Nice. What is your favorite clothing brand? Because you're an executive. And then in the book, you talk about, how you dress and you want it with confidence and stuff. Yeah. What is your favorite clothing brand?
I go for a Uniqlo.
Okay.
It's simple. It's straightforward.
Classic,
It's classic and it's, a little bit trendy, but not too much. So it's just very straightforward and it's kind of my go-to.
Yeah, I love Uniqlo. And I think, I think when I went to Japan, maybe I even passed by like their Tokyo, the stores. This is huge. Yeah. The Uniqlo is a really good brand.
Yeah.
All right. The last one is a spicy question. So right now, I think everybody's aware the political climate is a little crazy. There are a lot of fights going back and forth, right? So a lot of companies, they're actually walking back their efforts, the years that have built on these like DEI foundation. So how can kind of minorities really to not feel discouraged, right? And then still stand out in this kind of environment?
Yeah, I would say that this is one of those cyclical cycles that you see. I feel like there's a phrase in like Chinese culture where it's like, if you go too fast, there's always a backlash, right? And you have to kind of, and I do think that as much as I love the DEI efforts and everything that was happening, like it almost felt like it went too fast.
Okay.
Right? And it left many people in, let's just call it middle America, if that's still, you think that still exists, behind.
Yeah.
Right? And so there are many people who are left behind, and that is creating the backlash that we see today in sort of the diversity efforts, right? They're like, why am I not a part of, the tech boom, right? And, why don't I have some of these leadership positions, or even am able to like put food on the table on a regular basis. So I think a part of it is really understanding where the other side is coming from. Not that you have to agree with it.
Yeah, have a little bit of empathy.
But the empathy and understanding, I think, is there. But to your question of like, it feels discouraging. It feels like, okay, we no longer have maybe the support or the momentum that we used to have. I would say that I'm a realistic person. Yes, that's true, right? There's a lot of companies where in this political environment, they're saying, we're going to walk back a lot of these policies. But guess what? When the political environment changes, which hopefully at some point it will, then that will also change, right? So there's a bit of, yes, it sucks, but it's not permanent. It's not forever. But on the other hand, it's like, well, that's what I deal with tomorrow. My promotion cycle is in 6 months. I don't think it's going to change in 6 months, right? So how does that affect everything? And I would say that it actually makes the things that matter that I talk about in the book, that I talk about in leadership in general, just matter more. And, we're both women as well. And I also think that it's not a level playing field for women, right? And so it's almost like we know in our hearts that we have to work a bit harder. We don't have the privilege. We have more obstacles. We have more things we have to overcome. And I think that it does take a little more effort to make that happen. And then on the other side, I think for the people who have kind of played the game, I think there are more of us. I think, if you look at compared to 10 years ago, when I was when I was starting out in product, more than 10 years ago, when I was starting out in product, there were like no female product leaders. And there was like definitely no Asian female like leaders, right? Like there was like zero, maybe one somewhere. But now, there's not many, but you can count a few, right? You start like counting a few, and then there's people who are doing coaching, and there's people who are, coming out and sharing their stories. So I think there is more resources, and that gives me hope that will also pull more people up, if you will, to mentor and coach and make it just, there's a force of the external environment making it harder, but also I think some of the demographics and actually having some of these leaders, Jensen, we would have not talked about, at the top, be like, okay, I'm going to pull some of these people along as well. I mean, if you look at a lot of the tech CEOs, you got Microsoft, you got, they're all Asian in some way, right? And minorities in some way. So I do think there is a different dynamic. And for what it's worth, I do think tech is a bit of a bubble versus if you look at, I don't know, retail or healthcare or, other industries. So I think it is, if you're in one of those other industries, it does also feel different. And so it's one of those questions of, to the extent you can transition industries, you may want to go to, or within industries, pockets where you're not fighting as hard. Right, like
have the right momentum.
Have the right momentum in the environment. Part of the reason I went to Meta was because they had a lot of Asian female product leaders. That's right. And I was like, okay, cool. Like it just feels it's gonna be a little bit easier. It's gonna be, on the margin a little bit easier because the culture is there and the people are there, and there's just a broader opening versus, I don't know, if I were in manufacturing in Missouri, it's gonna be a lot harder.
The place you choose also matters. There's also the macro environment, something we might not be able to control, but there's also the micro side, the company you join or the team you have, or the team leader, like the manager. How does the manager value diversity? If the person does not value diversity, maybe don't join that team. That's a very...
Yeah, and it's also about finding that one or two people that's going to pull you up. Right? Like it's not, you don't need 100 people. Right. That's true. So that's the macro environment, right? You need one person who believes in you, to pull you up in your career. And that, I mean, it's not easy to find by any means, right? Like, and to make sure it happens, but you need one. That's why I always also tell people when they're looking for jobs, you need one job. Right. You just want, economy sucks, and fewer jobs, but you need just one. You don't need 100. I think it's similar on the career side. It's like find those people and then find the one person who really believes in you and follow them, right? Like, and build your career based on their momentum as well.
Yeah, I love that. All right, thank you so much. Yeah, I learned a lot from our conversation.
Great.
Yeah, if you have time, check out her book, The Uncommon Executive. And then US newsletter is also full of wisdom. I remember the one you talked about how to kind of stay ahead in rewards. I forward to many friends. That's how we got connected. That was a really good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.